Let's get back to the seriousness of school funding in Illinois to the extent that the state legislature takes it seriously. Mark Lennon, writing in wirepoints.com, here's his op ed on it. Senate Bill 1 is the name of the legislation that the governor, Governor Ronner, is waiting to be sent to him so he can amendatorily veto it, as he said he would do, to carve out the Chicago Democrats' latest gambit to take everybody else's money to provide temporary reprieve for the Chicago teachers' pensions. That's what the real crux of it is. But there's more to it than that. And in Mark Lennon's op-ed, he summarizes it thusly: it's obtuse and hopelessly opaque. It's a nightmare of complexity and a triumph of central planning. Key authors who are among those who know what's in it cannot be trusted. The bill, Freudian slip, is full of language that is inscrutable and mandates that are disturbing. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Ted Dabrowski, the Vice President of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute, illinoispolicy.org. Todd, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, good morning.
So, do you agree with Mark Lennon's takeaway on the topic?
Oh, Mark nails it 100% on the head. I had a chance to work on the previous formula, and that was at the time the most convoluted, complex, and nation state or structured formula. Well, this one is much worse, much more complex. And I can bet you nobody there in Springfield has any idea how this thing works.
Do they even have an idea what the implications are for their school districts? We've talked about on the show before the hold harmless piece of this. So, they're touting, the authors, the supporters, those who voted for it, touting this as, hey, no school district loses because we've got a pot of money that we're going to hold all school districts harmless. Well, what if that pot of money ever goes away, which it's likely to in year 2 or year 3 or year 4? By definition, you wouldn't have to hold schools harmless if everybody was winning. That means some people are losing. And do the legislators and school superintendents and school boards and families in suburban school districts in particular understand just what they may lose if the politicians don't keep their promises?
Well, let me take something back. There are people that know what this thing does, and what it does is it bails out Chicago for sure. And, the guys that structure these things, they may not understand fully what goes on, but they do know who's protected and who's not. And so, those formulas are set up to protect Chicago and to protect a few districts. And then there's the others who are promised something, who might be surprised, like you say, in 2 or 3 or 4 years when they lose their promises.
And who are those others?
Well, a lot of those are going to be the suburban districts. The suburban districts may get big surprises when they're told right now that they will be held harmless. In other words, they won't get less than they're getting today. But when the money runs out, as may happen in Illinois, there's going to be cuts. And there's going to be a lot of surprises for those who think this is a good idea.
Well, Governor Ronner, I heard a lot of the ladies in my neighborhood. I live in Chicago. They're saying that, he's stealing from Chicago and giving to downstate districts, and that this is political suicide for Governor Ronner. Do you believe any of what they're saying?
Well, anybody who knows a little bit about Illinois politics and Illinois corruption knows that Chicago does a really good job of running the finances. And Chicago always manages to somehow make those formulas work for them. This happened 20 years ago when CPS was broke. They rigged all the formulas. Chicago got a lot of benefits. Now they've burnt through all that money, and they're at it again, going to the formula again to see if they can get more.
One other aspect of Senate Bill 1 that's been underreported, because like people like Amy's friends just look at money. They don't care about outputs. They don't care about educational attainment. They just care about money. And so one other thing that's been underreported, and the same thing with the press corps, Chicago press corps too, because they don't know what the hell they're talking about either, and are disinterested in outcomes, clearly based on the outcomes we get and how it's reported. But there is the micromanagement of all school districts in Illinois by the state in Senate Bill 1. Now, we talked to Jason Barrickman, a Republican state senator, who's also bought into, and what I'm talking about here is this evidence-based funding formula, quote unquote. He's also bought into the evidence-based funding formula, but he suggests, at least from his perspective, this Senate Bill 1 is not his bill, but he does buy the premise of evidence-based funding. He's saying all I'm doing or all I want to do is put forward best practices for school districts to consider and see if they want to follow some of the best practices we've identified or not, but there wouldn't be funding punishment, if they don't. In Senate Bill 1, which is what the governor's waiting for in terms of to arrive to his desk, Senate Bill 1, that's not the case. Senate Bill 1, the language in the legislation is fairly clear that if you're not abiding the state-mandated employee-to-student ratios, minimum hiring requirements for principals and assistants, support staff, per pupil expenditure, how many music and art teachers to hire, how much to spend on technology for students. If you're not abiding all of that, then you do have your funding on the block.
Well, it's amazing. They have this prescription of exactly how you're supposed to spend your money, that this evidence is going to be, they have evidence that if they hire and spend the money like this, that everything's going to be beautiful. That's never happened anywhere in education. It's really hard to prove that anything really works. And so this formula they've come up with is very prescriptive. They tell everybody exactly what they're supposed to do, which sounds a little bit like some former socialist country. And then not only that, they could lose. Districts could lose their funding if they don't follow it. Now that's one way. Another way to look at this, though, is that in the previous formulas they've had things like poverty grant, which were meant to go for poor kids, but they didn't spend them. The districts didn't spend the money that way. They just spent it on bigger salaries, bigger pensions, and now they're coming to ask for more money. So it's really hard to know how these formulas play out, but they are very political. They're meant to drive more money to a place like Chicago, and in the end, this formula counts on $3 to $6 billion more in yearly funding for it to actually work. So just be on the lookout for the next tax hike when they need more money for this. They'll say that education is not working because they don't have enough money.
Well, right.
Well, what else can they tax?
Well, here's the other thing. If you're a suburban school district that's on the chopping block, if heavens forbid, the politicians don't keep their promises in Illinois, gee, that would be a real new occurrence.
Yeah.
If you're on then you're going to see your property taxes increase because where are the school district's going to go if they see their general state aid reduced, right?
Well, they're going to get a double whammy, Dan. First of all, they're going to see their property taxes go up because they need to fund their own school because the state cuts the funding. But at the same time, who's going to pay the higher income taxes to fund all the other schools? It's going to be those same districts or the same people in those districts. So this is a horrible deal, especially if you're a suburb that spends a lot of money on education from their own pockets through property taxes. It's a lose-lose for them.
And now my understanding as well on Senate Bill 1, again, which the governor is waiting to be sent to his desk, passed by the Chicago Democrat-controlled General Assembly, that the legislation was authored in principle by Ralph Martiri, who's this left-wing crank pretending to be a numbers guy who's essentially just a public sector union flack. Ralph Martiri famously believes that every dollar that the government spends has a positive multiplier. So by Ralph Martiri's logic, we should confiscate everybody's private money and turn it all over to the government so they can derive a better ROI than we are able to do in our private lives. That's essentially the logical extension of his position. That's been his position. And if he is behind this legislation, then what you're really just talking about is an expansion of hiring public school teachers and staff and just an expansion of the state. It's a hiring program.
Oh, it's absolutely that. And Ralph, there's no tax hike he doesn't like, and he will always say that a tax hike will be better for the economy and create more jobs. That's his favorite mantra. So this kind of bill that calls for $6 billion more in yearly spending a year is exactly what he wants. And it's again after the huge tax hike we just had, it's the last thing we need. And I think this funding formula is just their way to grow the government and to take more control, especially away from locals.
One other aspect of this discussion this week is the tax credit proposal. This would provide a tax credit for people and corporations who want to voluntarily contribute to create a scholarship fund for low-income children to have better school options. This is in place in places like Florida. It's been wildly successful. This against the backdrop of Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation for Teachers, saying that school choice is rooted in racism, which will come as a real shock to all of the Latino families and African-American families who have benefited from school choice in major urban centers and in states like Florida and Indiana and Wisconsin. But the importance of the tax credit proposal that is being bandied about, Ted, and what it means specifically for minority families in urban centers, not just Chicago, but mid-sized urban centers around the state, against the backdrop of Randy Weingarten's hysteria.
Well, I think there's nothing that empowers a black, Hispanic, or any low income, it doesn't matter what color or race you are, nothing empowers them more than putting the cash in the parents' hands and choosing the best school for their kids. And I don't know where Weingarten would say something like that it's racist. For me, it's the most empowering thing there is, and we'd love to see more of it. I think what's racist is giving the administration at CPS all the control of that money and creating a system that's such a failure where, kids aren't, 80% of kids have to go into remediation right when they graduate from college, from high school, or they can't read in the third grade. That's the real problem. But empowering families with scholarship money, are you kidding me? That is the most empowering thing there is.
Yeah, what is it? Charter schools in Chicago with 50,000 kids, another 25,000 on the waiting list. Those are majority minority families. Are they all racist? I mean, it's just utter silliness, but this is what you get from the teachers' unions. He is Ted Dabrowski, Vice President of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. Ted, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot